I used to approach intimacy like a carefully choreographed performance, every movement calculated, every breath controlled for years. I believed good sex meant being quiet still, and most importantly, small. I'd hold my stomach in, keep my thighs pressed together, and never ever let myself fully feel that. Changed the night with Daniel. It started ordinarily enough, his apartment. The soft glow of table lamps casting shadows across the walls when his fingers found the hem of my blouse. My automatic response kicked in tense retreat, make myself compact. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing, his hands moved with deliberate patience. The pads of his fingers traced idle patterns along my bare shoulder, following the slope of my collarbone with something resembling reverence when I instinctively pulled away. He simply waited, his palm warm and steady against the small of my back. "Just breathe," he murmured, his lips brushing my temple, and so I did, slowly, muscle by muscle. I began to unfurl. His touch wasn't demanding, but inviting, each caress a question rather than a command. The way his thumb circled my hip bone, the way his breath hitched when I finally relaxed into him. These became my anchors in the present moment. For the first time I understood pleasure wasn't about perfection, but presence. The way my body naturally curved became something to celebrate, not correct. When I finally stopped holding my breath, the world didn't end. Instead, it expanded that night. I didn't just share my body with someone, I rediscovered it for myself. And in the quiet aftermath, curled against his chest, I realized this was what intimacy was meant to be. Not performance, but conversation. Not judgment, but discovery. There's a moment before skin meets skin, that electric. Pause anticipation hums louder than any touch I'd felt it before, but never like this. Never with this kind of quiet certainty. Daniel's hand hovered at the curve of my waist, not hesitating but savoring when his fingers finally made contact. It wasn't the rushed groping I'd come to expect. It was slow, deliberate. His palm smoothed up my ribcage, tracing each bone like he was counting them. My breath hitched, but not from nerves this time, from the sheer novelty of being known so thoroughly without a word being spoken. His touch was a language all its own. The rough pads of his fingertips contrasted with the softness of his lips as they brushed my shoulder. Every movement felt intentional. The way his thumb circled the dip of my hip, the way his other hand cradled the back of my neck, steadying me. I'd never realized how much tension I carried until I felt it unravel under his hands, and then the smallest shift, his mouth found the sensitive spot beneath my ear, and my body reacted before my mind could interfere. A gasp escaped me, unfiltered. No overthinking, no editing, just pure unguarded response. That was the revelation. Pleasure didn't have to be chased or performed. It could be received, given a gift offered without expectation. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't a demand. It was an invitation, one I finally felt ready to accept. There comes a moment when thought dissolves into sensation, when the mind finally surrenders to the wisdom of the body that night. With Daniel, I crossed that threshold without realizing it. His hands moved with quiet authority, mapping my skin like he was committing every curve to memory. The scrape of his stubble against my collarbone sent shivers down my spine, each nerve ending sparking to life in its wake. I never noticed how sensitive that space below my ear was until his teeth grazed it. Not hard enough to mark, just enough to make my fingers clutch at his shoulders. The weight of him above me should have felt restrictive. Instead, it anchored me, his hips pressing mine into the mattress. Our breathing falling into sync when his palm slid up my thigh. I expected my usual self-consciousness to flare, but something remarkable happened. I arched into his touch instead. Of shrinking away, heat pulled low in my stomach as his fingers traced patterns. Only he knew my usual mental commentary. Is this angle flattering? Should I be quieter? Faded into white noise. There was only this. The drag of cotton sheets against my back, the salt and skin scent of him, the building tension coiling tighter with each deliberate stroke when the climax came. It wasn't the sharp explosion I'd faked before. It rolled through me in waves, drawing a sound from my throat that was equal parts surprise and relief. Daniel's arms tightened around me as I trembled, not pushing for more, just holding me through the aftershocks in that hazy stillness. Afterward, I made a discovery pleasure wasn't something to be achieved, it was something to be allowed. The space between our bodies had become its own language, one of heat and whispered touches of unspoken permissions, granted where I once stiffened at unfamiliar hands. I now found myself leaning into Daniel's touch, like a flower turning towards sunlight. His lips traced the column of my throat with unbearable patience. Each kiss a silent promise. I felt the evidence of his desire pressed against my thigh. Yet he moved with the restraint of someone savoring every moment. When his hand slipped beneath me, pulling me closer, I marveled at how natural it felt to be this near, this bare. The world narrowed to points of contact, his callous palms sliding up my ribs, my nails scoring lightly down his back. The damp heat where our skin met and clung, time stretched and bent. The slow drag of his hips against mine felt both endless and over too soon. When pleasure crested, it came not as a crashing wave, but as a rising tide pulling me under with inexorable gentleness, my back arched of its own volition. A silent offering he accepted with a groan muffled against my shoulder afterwards. As we lay tangled in the wreckage of sheets, I realized the most intimate surrender hadn't been physical. It was the quiet moment when I stopped worrying about how I looked and simply existed, and how I felt Daniel's fingers drawing idle circles on my hip bone. Weren't just touching me, they were saying without words that I was already enough. Morning light filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across Daniel's sleeping form. I watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, my fingertips hovering just above his skin without touching. There was something sacred about this quiet aftermath. The way our bodies rested together without demand or expectation. His arm lay heavy across my waist, anchoring me to the present. I studied the contrast of his sun-kissed forearm against my paler skin, marveling at how natural it felt to be this entwined. The scent of last night still lingered on our skin, salt and warmth, and something indefinably intimate as sunlight crept across the rumpled sheets. I made a quiet discovery. The most profound transformation hadn't happened in the heat of passion, but here in this ordinary morning light. The way my body curved naturally against his no longer felt like something to correct the softness of my stomach pressed against his side. Wasn't a flaw, but simply part of the landscape we'd explored together. Daniel stirred his sleepy fingers, finding mine beneath the sheets. No words passed between us, but in that simple touch, I understood this was what intimacy truly meant. Not just the joining of bodies, but the quiet courage to be seen exactly as you are. The woman who had entered his apartment yesterday would have counted flaws and measured angles. The woman who lay here now simply breathed and let herself be. Some awakenings happen in grand moments.